American by chance, a Canadian by choice. Calling Bruce a naturalist would be an understatement. He has an impressive background in environmental activism and advocacy. He led the charge to stop aerial forest spraying with deadly synthetic insecticides. He was a co-founder and first co-chair of the Lake Superior Binational Forum, which advised the International Joint Commission on ways to reduce pollution and foster sustainability around Lake Superior. He has introduced bills and motions on climate change, strengthening the role and effectiveness of the Parliamentary Budget Officer and the Auditor General, fostering cooperation across party lines in Parliament. Bruce is a strong supporter of proportional representation, and he is the Green Party MP for Thunder Bay, Superior North. Bruce Hyer.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Vote Canada, for inviting me and all of us here today. My task, I guess, is to say the bottom line and the first line is electoral reform is a top priority for the Green Party of Canada. And I'm going to digress just very briefly, though, because you're stuck there and I have this chance. I have three big issues that I've set for myself and my staff over the time that I remain in Parliament, whether that's 18 months or 5 years. And they are gaps in income, first, and some sort of guaranteed annual income. The second is dealing with global climate change and putting some kind of significant price onto carbon. And the third, not necessarily last, is electoral reform, achieving proportional representation, having ridings control the nomination process, and getting MPs working for their constituents again instead of for parties. So you didn't ask me to talk about the first two today, so I'd just like to read you one sentence that I wrote, and if anybody's interested later, you can contact me at my email. It goes right to my laptop. It's easy to remember if you know how to spell my last name. It's bruce@brucehyer.ca, bruce@brucehyer.ca. I answer most of my emails myself. And so what I've written here is both a guaranteed annual income and pricing carbon effectively can be achieved simply by instituting the very good idea of the Citizens Climate Lobby, both in the US and Canada. That is to say, a carbon fee and dividend system of pricing carbon, where the carbon fees go not to government, not a penny, but directly to each and every Canadian into their pocket as a disincentive for carbon and to level the playing field. So I probably will have to run away today after the talk, so I may not be able to talk to you very much here, but feel free to either Google carbon fee and dividend or write to me and I'll send you an essay I've written about it. So now let's get back to electoral reform. I have done a lot of things in my life. You only heard 2% of the resume. I'm very old. I'm older than I look. Had no white hair when I came to Parliament. Look what 5 years in Parliament does to you. Just like Larry. I should show you my picture from 1976 sometime with my shoulder-length hair. But I have never seen any organization, I've never seen any process as dysfunctional as the Parliament of Canada. If you think it's a disaster, yes, it is. Fair Vote Canada has played a very key role in putting electoral reform issues on the table as a political issue, and good for you for doing it. I also have been working in a parallel fashion, and one of my key staffers is Andy Blair, who you know well, and if I ever didn't give this enough attention, Andy would have my hide. Andy would have loved to have been here today. Many days I say I work for Andy. So I've asked lots of questions in the House of Commons about reforming our voting system, and democratic reform ministers of several parties, one after another, say that Canadians don't really want to change the system. I don't believe that, actually. I think we're winning. Slowly but surely, but I think we're winning. And I think the fact, I don't emphasize the fact that we've lost those referendums. think about the fact that we got those referendums, and every time we lose, we're getting closer to winning. A majority of Canadians, I believe, are starting to come on board. They also are beginning to realize, or really realize, that Parliament is very flawed. And so political parties now are starting to really have to deal with this issue. I'd like to quote a little bit of research it's very interesting stuff. There's a man, Dr. Arend Liphart. He's an academic at the University of California, and he studied 39 Western democracies and compared them and published a book called Patterns of Democracy. Liphart is spelled L-I-J-P-H-A-R-T, Dutch, I think. He found that false majoritarian systems like first past the post have generally a very toxic political atmosphere where one regional power base is pitted against another and issues are hyper-politicized, issues like climate change. He also found that countries with a winner-take-all system have suffered from wild and very expensive and very disruptive policy swings as one government representing a minority enacts very strong policies, only to be reversed when another government representing a different minority of voters scraps them and starts over, throws out the babies with the bathwater quite often. He found the following things. He found generally that consensus-style democracies with proportionality in their voting system perform at least equally to winner-take-all democracies on most counts, but way better in a handful of key areas, including a better handle on inflation, better on crime in general despite lower incarceration rates, more foreign aid work, better social supports, better care and outcomes for the environment, and lower gaps in income. The politics in those countries have a much more functional and business-like proceedings, I know, because I go to Europe a lot and go to their parliamentary sessions, and they're far less confrontational, far more cooperative, and as you know, quite often they're operating in coalitions or minority governments, and they've learned long ago how to cooperate. Whereas here, the two main parties go back and forth. Both now assume that they're the natural governing parties, and every 8 years they'll get to feet at the trough for 8 years, and then the next 8 years the other guys will get to feet at the trough, and they like the system the way it is. A few weeks ago, I was invited to speak in Toronto with Joyce Murray of the Liberals and Linda McQuaig, the NDP candidate in Toronto Centre, at an event on climate change and our voting system. And both of those people deserve real thanks for advocating proportional representation within their parties. And so both of those parties are now having serious discussions on voting reform. And I know that Craig and Sheila are fighting the good fight within the NDP and the Liberals, and thank you for doing that. Because a broken voting system results in broken policies. For example, if the job of any voting system is to translate the will of the people into government policy and action, then, for example, it's near and dear to my heart that Canada's climate change policy fiasco is certainly Exhibit A on how our voting system is serving Canadians very poorly. The majority of Canadians now clearly want a price on carbon. They're willing to pay for it. They want action taken, but it's not happening. The reasons for that are many, to be sure, but a key one is our dysfunctional voting system. And very few media pay attention to this, except for a few like Andrew Coyne. So if you get a chance, send Andrew Coyne an email or give him an attaboy for Andrew Coyne does bring up proportional representation again and again and again. The situation is very similar regarding, that is, broken system, regarding security, surveillance, privacy rights, flawed trade agreements, credibility on our international stage, how we treat First Nations, the list goes on and on and on. And everybody says it, but I think it's important. In your elevator speeches, for people who don't understand it, anytime you have a voting system where you have a government that gets 39% of the vote, seizes 100% of the power, they're going to do it. And they're going to want to keep doing it, and they're not going to want to give it up. Power is intoxicating stuff. And as Henry Kissinger says, on top of that, it's an aphrodisiac. So, the two main parties, sorry about this, but the two main parties will never ever govern in the best interest of all Canadians. And we got a big mountain to climb, I don't know how we're going to climb it. Canadians should be outraged by our pervasive system of false majorities. Most Western democracies, 95% of all democracies, Western democracies, use some kind of proportional representation. And so people who come from those countries to Canada just can't believe the system we have. And that's before they even know about the Senate. So real democracy means that people should agree to the laws. The majority of people should agree. Virtually everybody should agree to live under the laws under which they are governed. And it should mean that true majorities should rule the country. And we sure don't have that today, do we? So now I got a couple of more partisan comments to make, sorry. But by the way, what Justin Trudeau has been proposing, that is preferential voting, is not proportional at all. It would be a step backwards, not forward, and it would continue to favor the two larger parties and make it even more difficult for smaller parties. And sorry, Craig, but the NDP had majority governments provincially in BC, Manitoba, Ontario, and Nova Scotia, and others, and they, in theory, were for PR. They had majority governments, and not once did they walk the walk and actually implement majority governments. And that's sad. I'd like to mention and highlight the other huge and little-known obstacle to democracy in Parliament that I know all too well. It's the tragic reasons why most MPs no longer work for constituents. It's the fact that National Party leaders hold a very sharp sword of Damocles, club, whatever metaphor you want to use, over the heads of their caucus members. And here's how that came to be. Because a lot of people don't seem to know this. Parties are not even mentioned in the Canadian Constitution. I don't want to do away with parties, by the way. But I would like to unempower them a bit in the House of Commons. They're not even mentioned in the Constitution. And from 1867 until 1970, MPs worked for their constituents, and the parties weren't even on the ballot. Just the name of the candidate and their occupation. So, for over a century, following elections, party leaders were controlled as much by their MPs as the reverse. It took persuasion and it took real leadership to keep a caucus together. Sir Johnny MacDonald called his own members loose fish. Then, in 1970, Pierre Trudeau changed the Elections Act to do two things. What was really noticed is he added party names to the ballot, but number two, hardly noticed in the fine print, and people still don't seem to know about it very much, was the requirement that candidates can only run for a party if the national leader signs their nomination papers. That's in the National Elections Act now. It's a club to hold over them, and it usually works. In one fell swoop, MPs changed from working for parties and leaders to instead of for constituents. And within weeks of putting that new act in place, Pierre Trudeau called his own backbenchers mere trained seals. One of my fellow MPs from my former party told me sadly recently that he has now just accepted his role as mostly a customer sales representative for his party in his riding. So what are we going to do about this? A good first step would be please support, please get involved, please find out about, support any way you can Michael Chong's Reform Act of 2014. Michael Chong is brilliant. He is kind. He is honest. He cares about the environment. He cares about democracy. He's an amazing man with a very large backbone. So do anything you can to back him, because his bill would allow the majority of MPs to change the leader in the House. And I think even more important, it would return the authority to riding associations to select candidates, not national leaders and backroom party hacks. So please tell your MPs you're going to be watching them carefully to see if they're going to dare to vote for Chong's bill and liberate themselves. I think the public stance of the parties is going to be that they're going to allow a free vote, ostensibly, but in back rooms they're going to put heavy pressure on people to rationalize being stuck in traffic in the washroom or find a little word in there somewhere so that they don't vote for it. So back to the Green Party, and then I'm almost done. Fair democracy with proportional representation is job number one for the Green Party. And that's not just because we're the small party that gets punished. I'm sure you know the numbers. If we had PR, Harper would not have 167 seats, he'd have 122. He'd either have to form a coalition or behave himself or operate in a minority system. The Liberals, instead of 34, would have 58 seats. They would have been better off this last time if they'd done something about PR before. The NDP actually has a couple more seats under PR than they would have under, under first past the post. Because in the last election, they were kind of a regional party, and first past the post favors regional parties from Quebec or Alberta. And there would be at least a dozen Green seats in the House of Commons, and that is what Canadians voted for. So a lot of people think that we need to get rid of Harper, electoral reform to get rid of Harper. Well, we sure need to get rid of Harper before he sends us over a cliff like a bunch of lemmings. But it does very little good to replace one phony majority prime minister with absolute power with just another one who has absolute power, and just hope the new one won't be so open to abusing those powers. So we have to change the system itself, as you know. So I should wrap up, except to say that this, especially in the two main parties, politicians in power are going to do or the ones that think they're going to have power soon, politicians in power will do anything to avoid or marginalize PR. They will say the Canadians don't care about it, and it's not an important issue. They'll try distraction, such as Senate alleged reform. They'll try deception, like saying, well, all will get to be just like Italy and Israel, which is easy to fix, by the way, if you don't know that. And they'll co-opt their allies in the media by raising various boogeymen like these. So please don't let them. If you're not involved, in the past, I found it fascinating and a little disappointing that until recently, Fair Vote Canada has been very averse to getting close to politicians. I've been a proponent of PR for decades, and Fair Vote has usually kept me at arm's length, and I was disappointed at that. That seems to be changing a bit, but whether it's individually or collectively, the only way the political system is going to change is, sorry about this, through politics. So find out who your allies are and invite them. And the ones that are really averse to this or throwing up smoke and mirrors, don't be gentle on them. Politics is, sorry, it's a blood sport. If you're gentle with politicians, they'll continue to do what they've always done. I'm a biologist, and we have three brains. We have the frontal lobes that are logical. The back of our head is emotional. And at the base of our spine is the reptilian brain. Well, most politicians operate in their reptilian brain. And so they move toward pleasure and away from pain. So give the ones that deserve it pleasure, and give the ones that deserve pain, give them pain. Thanks so much for inviting me.